The sky above Zephyria burned red as another Krex hive ship entered the atmosphere. Commander Vilix pressed his feathered hands against the cold metal of the communication console, watching the massive dark shapes descend like storm clouds toward his world. The bird-like alien's golden eyes reflected the glow of distant explosions as the third continent fell to the insect invaders. "Sir, we have lost contact with the Eastern Defense Grid," reported Lieutenant Kess, her voice shaking with fear. "The Krex ground forces have overrun the coastal cities." Vilix nodded slowly, his elegant neck drooping with exhaustion. For 3 weeks, his people had fought against the Krex Dominion with everything they had. The Zalhari were a peaceful race, more comfortable tending their floating gardens than wielding weapons. Their technology was advanced, but designed for creation, not destruction. Against the endless swarms of Krex warriors, their defenses meant nothing. "How many ships do we have left?" Vilix asked, though he already knew the answer would break his heart. 12 patrol vessels and the orbital station," Kess replied. "Everything else has been destroyed or captured." The Krex had come without warning, their black ships appearing at the edge of the system like a plague of locusts. They demanded nothing, offered no terms, and gave no quarter. They simply attacked with wave after wave of drone fighters and ground troops. The insectoid aliens fought with cold efficiency, their hive mind coordinating attacks that overwhelmed any defense. Vilix walked to the large window that overlooked the capital city of Ethros. Below, millions of Zelhari civilians huddled in shelters while Krex atmospheric fighters screamed overhead. The beautiful crystal spires that had taken centuries to grow now lay shattered, their rainbow colors dulled by smoke and ash. "Commander," called Communications Officer Thane from across the room, "we are receiving responses to our distress calls." Vilix turned quickly, hope flickering in his chest. "From whom?" "The Galactic Council has acknowledged our transmission," Thane said, his voice flat. "They express regret, but state that military intervention would be too costly. The Vorthic Empire says they cannot spare ships from their own borders. The Crystalline Collective offers to provide refuge for survivors after the planet falls." The hope in Vilix's chest turned to ice. "Anyone else?" "The hegemony of Tal suggests we negotiate surrender terms with the Krex," Thane continued. "They believe resistance is futile given the enemy's numbers." Vilix closed his eyes and felt the weight of his species' fate pressing down on him. The Zelhari had joined the Galactic Council 50 years ago, contributing their knowledge of agriculture and bioengineering to the greater community. They had answered calls for aid from other worlds, sharing their resources freely. Now, when they needed help, the galaxy turned away. "Sir," Thane said quietly, "there is one more response." "Who?" "The humans." Vilix opened his eyes in surprise. Humans were the newest members of the Galactic Council, having joined only 5 years ago. They were classified as a Deathworlder species, coming from a planet so harsh that most other races considered it barely habitable. The Council had accepted them reluctantly, viewing them as primitive, but potentially useful as laborers in dangerous environments. "What do they say?" Vilix asked. Thane looked at his console with confusion. "They want to know our exact location and the size of the Krex force. They are asking for tactical data." "Are they planning to help us?" "I think so, sir." The transmission came from a ship called the USS Defiant. The human captain says they will relay our information to their fleet command. Vilix felt a strange mixture of gratitude and disbelief. The humans had perhaps a dozen ships in this sector of space, small vessels designed for patrol and exploration. What could they possibly do against the massive Krex armada? "Send them everything we have," Vilix ordered. "Ship positions, troop movements, defensive capabilities. If they are willing to try, we must give them every advantage." As Thane worked at his console, Another explosion shook the command center. Through the window, Vilix could see Krex ground. Forces advancing through the city streets, their six-legged forms moving with mechanical precision. The insectoid warriors stood twice as tall as a Zelhari, their chitinous armor gleaming in the firelight. "Message sent, sir," Thane reported. "The humans acknowledge receipt and say they will respond within 6 hours." 6 hours. Vilix wondered if his people would survive that long. The Krex had already taken 3 of their 7 continents. The orbital defenses were failing, and the ground forces were being pushed back on all fronts. Even if the humans came, what could a small patrol fleet do against such overwhelming odds? "Sir," Lieutenant Kess called out, "we have incoming missiles from the Krex fleet. Impact in 30 seconds. Raise shields and prepare for impact," Vilix commanded, gripping the railing as the station shuddered under the first wave of explosions. As the lights flickered and alarms blared throughout the command center, Vilix looked up at the stars visible through the reinforced windows. Somewhere out there, a human captain was reading their distress call and deciding whether to risk his crew for a species he barely knew. The Galactic Council had written off the Zelhari as lost, but maybe the newcomers from the Deathworld would see things differently. The station shook again as more missiles found their mark. Vilix steadied himself and turned back to his crew. "Continue transmitting our location to any ships that might come to help," he ordered, "and keep fighting. Our people deserve to know we never gave up." In the depths of space, Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair aboard the USS Defiant, reading the Zelhari transmission with growing anger. The bird-like aliens were facing extinction, and the so-called advanced civilizations of the galaxy were content to let it happen. He looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew, seeing the same determination reflected in their eyes. "Lisa, plot a course for the Zelhari system," he said to his tactical officer. "Pete, get me Admiral Phillips on the comm. We have a job to do." The USS Defiant dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zelhari system, followed by 4 other human vessels. Captain Jake Morrison stood on his bridge, staring at the tactical display that showed the scale of the enemy force. Dozens of massive Krex hive ships hung in orbit around the blue-green world of Zephyria, like black tumors against the starfield. "Jesus Christ," whispered Lieutenant Lisa Grant from her tactical station. "Look at the size of those things." Each Krex hive ship was easily 10 times larger than the biggest human vessel. They were dark, organic-looking structures that seemed to pulse with their own life. Smaller ships swarmed around them like insects, numbering in the thousands. "Captain," called Communications Officer Ganny Walsh, "we are receiving a transmission from the Zelhari orbital station." "Put it through," Morrison ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the face of Commander Vilix. The alien's golden eyes were wide with surprise, and something that might have been hope. His feathered crest drooped with exhaustion, and Morrison could see the strain of the past weeks written across his features. "Human vessel," Vilix said in accented but clear English. "I am Commander Vilix of the Zelhari Defense Corps. We did not expect anyone to answer our call for help." "We got your message," Morrison replied. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Fleet. We brought what we could on short notice." Vilix looked at the tactical display showing the 5 small human ships, and his expression fell slightly. Morrison could see the alien trying to hide his disappointment. Against the massive Krex armada, 5 patrol vessels seemed like a joke. "Captain Morrison," Vilix said carefully, "I must inform you that the Krex forces are substantial. We have lost 3 of our 7 continents to their ground forces. Their space fleet contains over 40 capital ships and thousands of fighters." "We can see that," Morrison said. "Tell me about their tactics. How do they fight?" Vilix seemed surprised by the question. "They attack in waves, using overwhelming numbers to crush any resistance." Their hive mind coordinates perfect formations that move as one. They sacrifice ships and troops without hesitation to achieve their objectives. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Murphy, the fleet's intelligence officer, leaned forward in his chair. Commander Vilix, do their attack patterns repeat? Are they predictable? Yes, Vilix replied, his voice gaining strength. They use the same formations every time. Wave attacks, always from the same angles. It is very efficient. Murphy exchanged glances with Captain Morrison. Predictable is good, he said quietly. Predictable means exploitable. Commander, Morrison said to Vilix, we need detailed information about their battle formations, ship types, and command structure. Can you provide that? Of course, Vilix said, though confusion was clear in his voice. But Captain, with respect, your force is very small. The Krex have already destroyed fleets much larger than yours. Let us worry about that, Morrison said, with a slight smile. We humans have some experience fighting against low odds. Over the next hour, the human ships moved closer to Zephyria while gathering intelligence. The Zalhari provided detailed tactical data about Krex formations and attack patterns. Morrison was impressed by the bird-like aliens' detailed record-keeping, even in the face of destruction. Captain, reported Chief Engineer Pete Collins from the engine room, all ships report ready for combat operations. The Wolverine and the Ranger are standing by for fighter deployment. Morrison nodded. The human task force was small but well-equipped. Besides the Defiant, they had 2 escort destroyers, a light cruiser, and a carrier loaded with fighters. Not much against a Krex armada, but it would have to be enough. Sir, Lisa Grant called out, the Krex fleet is moving. It looks like they are preparing for another assault on the planet. On the tactical display, Morrison could see the enemy ships beginning to shift into formation. Thousands of small craft were launching from the hive ships, forming into the wave. Patterns that Vilix had described. Captain, Vilix appeared on the screen again. The Krex are beginning their final assault. They will bombard our remaining cities from orbit before landing more ground forces. We estimate 6 hours before complete planetary surrender. Morrison looked at his crew. Lisa Grant was running calculations on her tactical computer. Ryan Murphy was studying the Krex formations with intense focus. Danny Walsh was coordinating with the other human ships. Dr. Helen Brooks, their xenobiologist, was analyzing the data about Krex biology and command structure. What do you think, people? Morrison asked his bridge crew. Their formations are rigid, Murphy said. They rely on overwhelming force and perfect coordination. But that also makes them inflexible. If we can disrupt their patterns, we can create chaos, Lisa finished. And chaos is something humans understand better than most. Dr. Brooks looked up from her console. Captain, I have been analyzing the Krex hive mind structure. They operate on a network system with central command nodes. If we can identify and target those nodes, we can turn their strength against them, Morrison said. All right, people. We have 6 hours to save a planet and an entire species. Let's show these bugs what Deathworlders can do. The human fleet moved into position between the Krex Armada and Zephyria. The 5 small ships looked pathetic against the massive enemy. Force, but Morrison felt a familiar confidence settling into his chest. Humans had always been at their best when facing impossible odds. Captain, Vilix said over the comm, the Galactic Council monitoring stations are tracking this engagement. They expect the Krex to destroy your fleet within minutes. Then they are about to learn something new about humans, Morrison replied. All ships, this is Defiant Actual. We are about to engage a superior enemy force in defense of an innocent species. Remember that we are not here to win through superior technology or numbers. We are here to win through superior will and tactics. Krek's fleet continued its advance, confident in their overwhelming superiority. Their formations moved with mechanical precision, each ship in its designated position. It was a display of perfect coordination that had crushed dozens of worlds. "Captain," Lisa reported, "Krek's fighters are launching. First wave consists of approximately 2,000 ships." Morrison settled into his command chair and smiled grimly. "Time to show them what happens when you mess with a Deathworld species. All ships break formation and engage at will. Remember, we are not here to fight fair. We are here to win." The human fleet scattered in 5 different directions, abandoning any semblance of traditional formation. The Kreks, expecting their enemies to meet them in organized battle lines, suddenly found themselves facing something they had never encountered before: pure, calculated chaos. "Here we go," Morrison said, as the first wave of enemy fighters approached. "Let's dance." The first wave of Krek's fighters came at the human fleet like a black tide, their formation perfect and deadly. 2,000 insectoid ships moved in precise geometric patterns, each one knowing exactly where its neighbors would be. It was a display of coordination that had overwhelmed every species they had faced. Then the humans did something unexpected. They scattered. "All ships, execute pattern Delta 7, Captain Morrison ordered over the cone. "Remember, we are not fighting their fight. We are making them fight ours." The USS Defiant rolled sharply to starboard, its engines flaring as it dove toward the planet's gravity well. The other human ships broke in different directions, abandoning all formation discipline. To the Krek's hive mind, it looked like panic. To the humans, it was the beginning of a carefully planned chaos. "Captain," Lisa Grant called out from her. "Tactical station. The Krek's fighters are trying to match our movements. They are breaking formation to pursue individual targets." Morrison smiled grimly. "That's what we want. A hive mind is strongest when it works as one. When it has to think about multiple problems at once, it gets confused." The human carrier USS Wolverine launched its fighters while spinning in a tight spiral, making it nearly impossible for the Kreks to predict where the small ships would emerge. Commander Alex Turner led the human pilots out of the launch bay in a formation that looked completely random, but was actually designed to maximize confusion. "Gold Squadron, this is Turner." Alex's voice crackled over the com. "Remember your training. We are not better pilots than they are, but we are more unpredictable. Use that." The human fighters began a series of maneuvers that would have been impossible for any hive mind to coordinate. They flew in crossing patterns, split-second timing changes, and sudden reversals that seemed to defy all logic. The Krek's fighters, programmed to counter organized attacks, found themselves unable to predict what the humans would do next. "Blue Leader, this is Gold One," Turner called to his wingman, Lieutenant Jenny Stone. "Execute the Morrison Shuffle." "On my mark. Copy that, Gold One. Ready to dance." The human fighters suddenly reversed course, flying directly at the Krek's formation. At the last second, they scattered in all directions, their weapons firing in seemingly random patterns. Kreks, expecting a coordinated attack, had positioned themselves to counter a unified assault. Instead, they found themselves taking fire from impossible angles. Aboard the Defiant, Morrison watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The first wave of Krek's fighters was already showing signs of confusion. Their perfect formations were breaking down as individual ships tried to pursue different human targets. "Captain," reported Chief Engineer Pete Collins, "the Kreks are trying to reform their attack patterns. They are pulling back to reorganize." "Not on my watch," Morrison said. "Lisa, target their command ship. The big one in the center of their formation." "Sir, that ship is protected by a screen of destroyers. We cannot get close enough for an effective attack." Morrison stood up and walked to the main view screen. The massive Krex hive ship hung in space like a bloated spider, its organic hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. Around it, dozens of smaller ships formed a protective barrier. "We are not going to attack it conventionally," Morrison said. "Pete, can you give me emergency power to the engines?" "Yes, sir, but it will burn out half our systems." "Do it." "Lisa, prepare a full spread of torpedoes for manual guidance." "Ryan, I need you to analyze the Krex defensive formation and find me a hole." Intelligence Officer Ryan Murphy bent over his console, his fingers flying across the controls. "Captain, their defensive screen rotates every 47 seconds. There is a gap in the upper starboard quadrant that lasts for approximately 3 seconds. 3 seconds, Morrison repeated. That will have to be enough. Danny, signal the other ships to cover our approach. We are going in alone." The Defiant suddenly accelerated toward the Krex formation, its engines burning at maximum power. The ship shook as it pushed beyond its safety limits, but Morrison held his course. The Krex destroyers turned to intercept, but the human ship was moving too fast and too erratically for them to get a clear shot. 15 seconds to the gap," Murphy called out. 10 seconds. 5 seconds. Now! The Defiant rolled inverted and dove through the gap in the Krex defensive screen. For a moment, the human ship was completely exposed to the massive guns of the hive ship. Then Lisa Grant fired every torpedo the ship carried, not at the enemy's weapons or engines, but at its communication arrays. The torpedoes struck home, tearing through the organic structures that allowed the hive mind to coordinate with the rest of the fleet. Suddenly, thousands of Krex ships found themselves cut off from their central command. "Direct hit on their command center," Lisa reported. "They are losing coordination across the entire fleet." Morrison could see the effect immediately. The Krex formations began to waver as individual ships lost contact with the hive mind. Some continued their previous orders, while others tried to establish new command links. The perfect coordination that had been their greatest strength was falling apart. "All ships, this is Morrison," he called over the comm. "The enemy is confused. Now we hit them with everything we have." The human fleet regrouped and began a series of coordinated attacks that took advantage of the Krex confusion. The destroyer USS Ranger, under Captain Lisa Martinez, led a charge through the center of the enemy formation, its guns blazing. The cruiser USS Falcon, commanded by Captain Bob Chun, circled around the enemy flanks, picking off isolated ships. Meanwhile, the human fighters continued their unpredictable assault patterns. Commander Turner's pilots had learned to read the Krex behavioral patterns and exploit them. When the enemy expected an attack from the left, the humans came from the right. When they prepared for a frontal assault, the humans struck from behind. "Captain, Dr. Helen Brooks called from her science station. I am detecting massive disruption in the Krex hive mind network. They are trying to reestablish command and control, but our attacks are preventing them from completing the connection. Keep hitting their command nodes," Morrison ordered. "Do not let them reorganize." The battle raged for 2 hours. The human fleet, outnumbered 100 to 1, used speed, unpredictability, and superior tactics to level the playing field. They could not match the Krex in raw firepower, but they could keep them off balance and confused. "Captain," Lisa Grant reported, "we are receiving a transmission from Commander Vilix. The Krex ground forces are also showing signs of confusion. They are requesting orders from their fleet, but the command structure is too damaged to respond." Morrison felt a surge of hope. If they could maintain the pressure on the enemy fleet, the ground forces might become vulnerable to a Zelhari counterattack. "Signal the Zelhari," he ordered. "Tell them to hit the enemy ground forces now, while they are confused. We will keep their fleet busy." On the surface of Zephyria, Commander Vilix received the human message with amazement. For the first time, In weeks, the Krex forces were showing uncertainty. Their perfect formations were breaking down, and their attacks were becoming uncoordinated. All units, Vilix broadcast to his remaining forces. The humans have given us a chance. We must take it now. Attack the enemy positions while they are confused. The Zalhari ground forces, inspired by the human fleet's courage, launched their rage. Own counterattack. The bird-like aliens were not natural warriors, but they fought with the desperation of a species facing extinction. In space, the battle continued. The human fleet darted between the massive Krex ships like minnows around whales, striking at weak points and retreating before the enemy could respond. It was a dance of death that played to humanity's greatest strengths: adaptability, unpredictability, and the refusal to surrender. "Captain," Ryan Murphy called out, "the Krex are trying to retreat. They are pulling back to regroup." Morrison shook his head. "Not happening. We cannot let them reorganize. All ships, pursue and harass. Do not let them think." The human fleet followed the retreating Krex ships, continuing their chaotic assault. Every time the enemy tried to form up, the humans would strike from an unexpected angle, forcing them to scatter again. For the first time since the invasion began, the Krex were losing. The Krex fleet was in chaos. What had started as a routine planetary conquest had become a nightmare of confusion and scattered formations. The hive mind, designed to coordinate millions of units with perfect precision, was struggling to adapt to the humans' unpredictable tactics. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiant, watching the tactical display with grim satisfaction. 3 Krex hive ships had been destroyed or disabled, and their fighter formations were scattered across the system. But the enemy still had overwhelming numbers, and the humans were running low on ammunition and fuel. "Captain," Lisa Grant reported, "we have eliminated approximately 30% of the enemy fighter force. However, our ships are taking damage." "The Ranger reports hull breaches on decks 4 and 5. Morrison nodded. The human fleet had performed better than anyone had expected, but they were still vastly outnumbered. They needed to end this battle quickly or risk being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. "Sir," Communications Officer Danny Walsh called out, "we are receiving a transmission from Commander Vilix. The Zalhari ground forces have retaken the eastern continent. They are requesting support for an assault on the main Krex landing site." Morrison felt a surge of hope. The bird-like aliens had found their courage and were fighting back, but they would need help to break the enemy's ground defenses. "Lisa, can we spare ships for a ground support mission?" "The Wolverine still has Marines aboard," she replied. "Major Carlos Rivera's unit is equipped for surface operations." Morrison made his decision. "Signal the Wolverine. Deploy the Marines to support the Zalhari ground assault. We will continue to keep the enemy fleet busy." The human carrier broke off from the main battle and headed towards Euphoria's atmosphere. Its belly opened, and dozens of drop pods launched toward the planet's surface. Each pod contained human Marines trained for combat in hostile environments. Major Carlos Rivera felt the familiar sensation of atmospheric entry as his drop pod plunged toward the planet. Through the small porthole, he could see the alien world spread out below him. The beautiful crystal cities of the Zalhari were scarred by battle, but many still stood proud against the sky. "All right, Marines," Rivera spoke into his tongue. "We are about to land in the middle of an active war zone. The Zalhari are good people fighting for their survival. Our job is to help them win." The drop pods slammed into the ground near the Krex landing site, a massive crater filled with enemy ships and thousands of insectoid warriors. The humans emerged from their pods with weapons ready, immediately engaging the nearest enemy forces. The Krex ground troops were larger and stronger than humans, but they were also slow and predictable. The Marines used their superior mobility and tactics to outmaneuver the enemy, striking at weak points and retreating before the insects could respond. "Rivera to Defiant," the Major called over his com. "We are on the ground and engaging enemy forces. The Zelhari ground troops are about 5 minutes out." In space, the battle continued with renewed intensity. The Kreks, realizing that their ground forces were under attack, began to redeploy their ships for orbital bombardment. Morrison could not allow them to destroy the surface forces. "All ships, this is Morrison," he broadcast. "The enemy is trying to support their ground forces. We must prevent any orbital bombardment of the planet." The human fleet moved to intercept the Krek ships heading for Zephyria. The USS Ranger, despite its battle damage, positioned itself directly in the path of the enemy bombardment fleet. "Captain." Lisa Martinez knew her ship might not survive, but she was determined to protect the Marines and Zelhari forces below. "This is Ranger," Martinez called over the com. "We are taking heavy fire but holding position. The ground forces are counting on us." Dr. Helen Brooks, working frantically at her science station aboard the Defiant, made a crucial discovery. "Captain, I have been analyzing the Krek's command structure. Their hive mind depends on a central queen brain aboard their flagship. If we can capture or destroy that brain, the entire fleet will lose coordination." Morrison turned to look at the massive Krek's flagship on the main screen. It was easily the size of a small city, bristling with weapons and surrounded by layers of defensive ships. Getting close to it would be suicide. "Where's this queen brain located?" he asked. "Deep inside the ship, probably in the most heavily protected section. But Captain, even if we could get aboard, the odds of reaching it are virtually zero." Morrison was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he smiled, the same expression he had worn when the battle began. "Ryan, can you identify the flagship's docking bays?" Intelligence Officer Ryan Murphy bent over his console. "Yes, sir." "There are several large openings on the lower hull. They appear to be used for launching ground assault craft." "Perfect. Lisa, can you get us close to one of those openings?" "Sir, the defensive fire around that ship is intense. We would be destroyed before we got within a mile." Morrison looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were tired, scared, but determined. They had come this far against impossible odds. Now they needed to finish the job. "We are not going to fly there," Morrison said. "We are going to be captured." The crew stared at him in confusion. Dr. Brooks was the first to understand. "You want them to think we are disabled," she said. "They will bring us aboard for interrogation." "Exactly. Pete, can you make it look like our engines are failing?" Chief Engineer Pete Collins grinned. "Captain, I can make this ship look like it is held together with duct tape and prayers." "Do it." "Lisa, prepare a boarding party. Light weapons only, and make sure everyone knows the mission. We are going to cut the head off the snake." The Defiant began to drift away from the main battle, its engines sputtering and smoking. To the Kreks, it looked like another damaged human ship trying to escape. The flagship dispatched a capture vessel to bring the humans aboard for interrogation. "Captain," Danny Walsh reported, "they are taking the bait. Enemy boarding craft approaching." Morrison stood up and checked his sidearm. Around him, his crew prepared for the most dangerous mission of their lives. They were about to board the enemy flagship and attempt to destroy the central brain of the Krek's hive mind. "Remember," Morrison said to his boarding party, "we are not trying to fight our way through the entire ship. We get in, find the queen brain, and destroy it. Speed and stealth are our weapons." The Krek's boarding craft attached itself to the Defiant's hull with a metallic clang. Human Marines, led by Sergeant Tony Baker, prepared to fight their way through the ship, while Morrison and a small team searched for the queen brain. "Here they come," Baker whispered, watching the airlock begin to cycle open. the first Krex warriors, entered the human ship, their six-legged forms moving with mechanical precision. They expected to find a defeated crew ready to surrender. Instead, they found humans ready to fight. "Now!" Morrison shouted. The boarding party struck with coordinated precision, overwhelming the Krex warriors before they could react. Within minutes, the humans had secured the enemy boarding craft and were preparing to enter the flagship. "Move fast," Morrison ordered. "We have one shot at this." On the planet's surface, Major Rivera and his Marines were fighting alongside the Zalhari ground forces, pushing the enemy back toward their landing site. The bird-like aliens had proven to be brave fighters when given hope and proper support. "Major," called Lieutenant Sam Johnson, "the Zalhari are reporting that the Krex ground forces are becoming more disorganized. Something is happening to their command structure." Rivera smiled grimly. "Captain Morrison is up there doing something crazy. Let's make sure it counts." The human and Zalhari forces launched a coordinated assault on the main Krex position, driving the enemy back with increasing momentum. For the first time since the invasion began, the tide of battle was turning in favor of the defenders. In space, the human fleet continued to harass the Krex ships, preventing them from coordinating an effective response. The enemy's greatest strength, their hive mind coordination, was becoming their greatest weakness as the humans exploited every gap in their defenses. Everything now depended on Captain Morrison and his boarding party. If they could reach the Queen Brain and destroy it, the entire Krex fleet would collapse. If they failed, the human fleet would eventually be overwhelmed by superior numbers. The fate of two species hung in the balance, deep inside the dark corridors of the enemy flagship. The corridors of the Krex flagship were a maze of organic tunnels that pulsed with a sickly green light. Captain Morrison led his boarding party deeper into the ship, following the directions Dr. Brooks had given him based on her analysis of the vessel's structure. The air was thick and humid, filled with the chemical scents of the hive mind. "Captain," whispered Sergeant Tony Baker, "we have movement ahead. Looks like guard drones." Morrison peered around the corner and saw a group of Krex warriors standing motionless in the corridor. Their six-legged forms were perfectly still, like statues waiting for orders. The disruption to their command structure had left them confused and inactive. "They are not responding to local threats," Morrison observed. "The hive mind is too damaged to coordinate individual units. We can slip past them." The boarding party moved carefully through the ship, avoiding the confused enemy forces. The deeper they went, the more organic the ship became. The walls were covered with pulsing veins, and the floor felt soft underfoot, as if they were walking through the body of some massive creature. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Jenny Stone, "my scanner is picking up intense neural activity dead ahead." "We are close to the Queen Brain." Morrison nodded. They had been fighting their way through the ship for 20 minutes, and he knew their luck would not hold much longer. The Krex would eventually realize they had been boarded and send forces to stop them. "There," Dr. Brooks pointed to a massive circular doorway ahead. "That has to be the central chamber." The door was sealed with what looked like living tissue, pulsing with the same rhythm as a heartbeat. Baker and his Marines placed explosive charges around the entrance, while Morrison prepared his team for the final assault. "Remember," Morrison said, "we only have one chance at this. Once we destroy the Queen Brain, the entire fleet will lose coordination, but we need to get out of here alive to see it work." The charges detonated, tearing through the biological door. The boarding party rushed into the chamber beyond and stopped in amazement. The room was enormous, filled with a massive brain-like structure that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Tendrils of neural tissue extended from the central mass to terminals throughout the chamber, carrying the commands that coordinated the entire Krex fleet. "My God," whispered Dr. Brooks. It is beautiful and terrible at the same time. Morrison raised his weapon. It is about to be destroyed. Everyone target the central mass. Full auto. Everything you have. The humans opened fire, their weapons tearing into the delicate neural tissue. The queen brain convulsed, its bioluminescent, patterns flashing wildly as it tried to maintain its connections to the fleet. Sparks flew from the neural terminals as the network began to collapse. Suddenly, the chamber filled with a high-pitched shriek that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The queen brain was dying, and its death cry echoed through every ship in the Krex fleet. "It's working!" Dr. Brooks shouted over the noise. "The neural network is collapsing." Morrison could feel the ship shuddering around them as the queen brains. Death throes sent chaos through the vessel systems. Lights flickered, and the organic walls began to convulse. They had succeeded, but now they needed to escape before the ship tore itself apart. "Move, move, move," Morrison ordered. Back to the boarding craft, now. The team ran through the corridors as the ship fell apart around them. Krex warriors stood motionless in the hallways, their connection to the hive mind severed. Without orders, they were nothing more than biological machines with no purpose in space. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The massive Krex fleet suddenly stopped moving in coordinated formations. Ships drifted aimlessly, their crews cut off from the central intelligence that had guided their every action. Some vessels began firing randomly, hitting their own allies. In their confusion, "Captain Morrison," Lisa Grant's voice crackled over the comm, "whatever you did in there, it worked. The entire enemy fleet is in chaos." Morrison and his team reached their boarding craft just as the flagship systems began failing completely. They detached from the dying vessel and raced back toward the Defiant, watching as the massive ship began to break apart from internal explosions. "Defiant, this is Morrison," he called over the comm. "Mission accomplished. The queen brain is destroyed." Captain Alex Turner, leading the human fighter squadrons, was the first to take advantage of the enemy's confusion. "All fighters, this is Turner. The bugs are sitting ducks. Take them down." The human pilots swept through the disorganized Krex formations, destroying ship after ship. Without coordination, the enemy vessels could not mount an effective defense. The fighters that had once moved in perfect swarms now flew in circles, bumping into each other and firing at empty space. On the planet's surface, Major Rivera watched, in amazement as the Krex ground forces simply stopped fighting. The insectoid warriors stood motionless in the middle of the battlefield, their weapons lowered. Without commands from the fleet, they had no idea what to do. "Zelhari forces, this is Rivera," he called over the comm. "The enemy has stopped fighting. Move in and secure their positions." Commander Vilix, leading the Zelhari counterattack, could hardly believe what he was seeing. The Krex forces that had terrorized his people for weeks were now helpless, standing like statues across the battlefield. His warriors moved carefully forward, disarming the confused enemy soldiers. "Major Rivera," Vilix said over the comm, "how did you humans accomplish this miracle?" Rivera smiled as he watched Krex warriors surrender without resistance. "We cut off their brain, Commander. Without their hive mind, they are just big bugs with no idea what to do." In space, the human fleet regrouped around the Defiant as Morrison returned to his ship. The Krex fleet was in complete disarray, with some ships fleeing the system while others drifted helplessly. The threat to Zephyria was over. "Captain," Dr. Brooks reported from her station, "I am detecting surrender signals from several Krex vessels. They are requesting instructions, but there is no one left to give them orders." Morrison looked at the tactical display, showing the scattered remains of what had been a mighty invasion fleet. In just a few hours, the humans had turned certain defeat into total victory through tactics, courage, and sheer determination. "Signal the surrendering ships," Morrison ordered. Tell them to power down their weapons and prepare to be boarded. Danny, open a channel to Commander Vilix. The Zalhari commander appeared on the main screen, his golden eyes bright with tears of joy. Behind him, Morrison could see other bird-like aliens celebrating their survival. Captain Morrison, Vilix said, his voice shaking with emotion. My people owe you a debt that can never be repaid. You came when no one else would help. You saved our entire species. Morrison felt uncomfortable with the praise. We just did what was right, Commander. No species should face extinction alone. The Galactic Council abandoned us, Vilix continued. They said we were not worth saving, but you humans proved them wrong. You showed that courage and honor matter more than advanced technology or superior numbers. Over the next several hours, the human fleet worked with the Zalhari to secure the system. The surviving Krex forces were taken prisoner, their weapons and ships confiscated. Many of the insectoid warriors, cut off from their hive mind, seemed almost relieved to surrender. Without the constant mental pressure of the collective, they displayed individual personalities for the first time. Captain, Communications Officer, Danny Walsh reported, "We are receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Word of our victory is spreading fast." Morrison sat in his command chair, reading the messages that poured in from dozens of worlds. Some were congratulations from human colonies. Others were requests for help from species facing their own threats. But the most interesting messages came from members of the Galactic Council. The Vorthek Empire, which had refused to help the Zalhari, was now asking about human military technology. The Crystalline Collective wanted to establish trade agreements. Even the hegemony of Tal, which had suggested surrender, was requesting meetings with human diplomats. Sir Ryan Murphy said from his intelligence station, Admiral Phillips is requesting a full report. Apparently, the entire Galactic Council is demanding to know how we defeated a force they considered unbeatable. Morrison smiled. Tell the Admiral we will have a full report ready soon. And Ryan, make sure to include details about human tactical doctrine. I have a feeling you're going to be very popular in the galaxy. 3 days later, Morrison stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt Zalhari orbital station, looking down at the beautiful blue-green world below. The crystal cities were already beginning to repair themselves, and the floating gardens were blooming again in the alien sunlight. Commander Vilix joined him at the viewing window, his feathered crest high with pride and renewed hope. Captain, Vilix said, my government has made a decision. We formally request that humanity become the protectors of the Zalhari worlds. In exchange, we offer our knowledge of bioengineering and agricultural science. Morrison looked at the alien commander with surprise. That is a generous offer, but we cannot accept payment for doing what is right. It is not payment, Vilix replied. It is partnership. The galaxy has many threats, and we have learned that.